I knew I shouldn't have come. The thought clung to me, like the perfume I'd sprayed too heavily before leaving. Musky jasmine, the same one Mom used to wear. It lingered as I stood at the edge of the reception, beneath a canopy of soft golden lights that glowed like false stars. My navy dress clung to my skin, tailored and elegant, but suddenly suffocating. I shifted the weight of the gift bag in my hand, pretending it gave me purpose, something to anchor myself with. My sister, glowing in a silk gown that cost more than my first car, twirled in the center of the dance floor. The crowd adored her, just as they always had. Laughter bubbled around the champagne towers, clinking glasses, flashes from iPhones capturing curated joy. I stayed near the back, not hiding, not exactly. Just resisting the pull of pretending. I felt him before I saw him. My father, Richard, approached with the smooth confidence of someone used to commanding rooms and winning arguments. His silver tie was slightly loosened, his glass of champagne full, untouched. His eyes were narrowed, mouth set in the familiar half-smile that never reached his cheeks. "Still playing the martyr?" he asked under his breath, tilting his glass toward mine like we were old friends at war. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. His smile thinned further. "You're making this harder than it has to be." He meant the house. My house. The one I bought with my own savings. The one I fixed after work and during weekends, hammering shelves with blistered fingers and brushing each wall with colors I chose. The one he'd suggested I buy under the family's name for tax reasons. The one he now wanted to sell, for my sister's dream honeymoon, for his quiet debts, for reasons never truly said aloud. "I told you I'm not selling," I said, voice low but steady. "Not to you, not to anyone." "You're being selfish," he replied, louder, sharper. People turned. From across the dance floor, my mother shifted uncomfortably beside the dessert table. My sister froze mid-laugh, bouquet halfway to her bridesmaid's hands. And then it happened. His hand. Open, calloused, swift. The slap cracked across my cheek like a gunshot beneath the chandelier. For 1 second, the music didn't stop. My own breath did. Then silence swallowed the courtyard. A collective intake of breath. Even the fairy lights seemed to flicker. I didn't move. I didn't cry. Instead, I stared at him. Really saw him. This man who taught me to walk by holding my hand through the garden. This man who used to tuck a $100 bill into my coat pocket before I went back to college and called it just in case. This man who now stared back with no apology in his eyes, only disappointment, ownership, entitlement. The weight of that gift bag in my hand suddenly meant nothing. I let it drop to the floor, landing with a soft thud, ribbon unraveling like spilled dignity. No one rushed to me. My mother lowered her eyes. My sister looked away. I turned and walked, slowly, deliberately, through the crowd that parted like something biblical. My heels clicked on the stone as if marking time. I didn't let them see me tremble. Only when I reached my car, parked beneath a crooked old street lamp just beyond the venue's edge, did I allow my fingers to brush my cheek. It burned. Not just from the slap, but from shame. Not mine, his. The shame he should have felt but never would. I sat behind the wheel, engine off, the silence pressing in like fog. My reflection in the rearview mirror stared back. A woman trying so hard not to crack. "What did I ever do to deserve this?" I whispered. And something inside me shifted. Not snapped, just shifted. Like ice beginning to melt. Like the first crack in a dam holding back years of swallowed truths. I took a long, shaky breath and turned on the ignition. The engine purred, obedient, alive, under my control. I didn't cry on the way home, but I rolled down the windows and let the wind mess up my hair. For the first time in years, I didn't care if I looked put together. I cared about being free. People always said I was the stable one. While my sister twirled in and out of majors, boyfriends, and impulsive road trips, I stayed grounded, reliable. The one who could be counted on to pick up the pieces after a family emergency, pay the phone bill without reminders, and drive our mother to her appointments when no one else remembered. "You were always so grounded," Aunt Marianne once said at Thanksgiving, patting my hand like I was a pet. "So loyal, so solid." I remember smiling, nodding, but something inside me shrank, as if she had just confirmed a secret I hadn't dared admit. I wasn't the favorite. I was the fallback. I didn't resent my sister, not in the way people expect. Lily was sunshine in a bottle, loud, bright, magnetic. Everyone adored her, including me once. I even helped pay for her college when our parents' plan didn't quite cover it. I put off moving out, stayed home longer than I should have, cooked dinners that were never really acknowledged, and absorbed the eye rolls when I suggested saving instead of spending. Back then, I thought love was sacrifice. I thought being needed was the same as being cherished. The house was supposed to change that. It came after years of working the kind of corporate job that drains you slowly, like a leaky faucet. I'd saved diligently, automated transfers, skipped vacations, wore the same 2 coats through 3 winters. When I found a quiet 3-bedroom cottage on the edge of town, peeling paint, crooked shutters but good bones, I fell in love with it in a way I hadn't fallen in love with anything. In years, I brought my dad to the showing. He said it was quaint, which for him was a compliment. "You could do worse," he muttered, hands in his pockets, surveying the cracked porch railing. "It's a smart investment. You could always rent it out down the line." I nodded, like a schoolgirl. I still craved his approval then, even when it came wrapped in indifference. He helped with the paperwork. Sat beside me in the bank lobby in his stiff suit, flipping through documents like he was closing a business deal. When the question of the deed came up, he paused. "Better to have 2 names," he said. "Just in case something happens. An legal buffer. Trust me, I was tired, I was grateful, and I was, above all things, obedient." So I signed, and he signed, and I told myself it didn't mean anything. The house became mine, or at least I believed it did. I painted the walls a soft sage green. I picked out curtains the color of oatmeal and sunrise. I bought second-hand furniture and arranged it with care. Each lamp and photograph a tiny declaration of adulthood. In the mornings, I'd stand barefoot in the kitchen, sip coffee, and feel something close to pride. Real pride. He never congratulated. Me just said, "Finally doing something worthwhile." It stung, but I swallowed it, like I always did. Lily visited once, said it was cute, in a voice that made it sound like I'd adopted a 3-legged dog. She stayed a weekend, left lipstick stains on my glasses, and forgot her charger. I found it 3 weeks later behind the couch, coiled like a question mark. I ignored the signs, even when they started flashing. An ex-boyfriend once told me, "You bend so far backwards for your family, I'm surprised you're not broken." A coworker, overhearing one of my stressed-out phone calls, suggested I set boundaries. Even a therapist, whom I saw for a short, expensive month, called my father's behavior controlling. But I made excuses. He's just practical. It's his way of showing love. He means well. They weren't red flags then. They were beige, muted, like the curtains I hung in the front room. The ones he later said, "Looked a little bland, don't you think?" I told myself it didn't matter. Because I was building something. Because I was safe. because I had a house, a home, with my name on it, mostly. Looking back, I can trace the lines of the contract I never signed, but always honored. Be the good daughter. Don't ask for more. Be grateful. Give without keeping score. And never, ever say no. That was the contract. Not legal, but ironclad. And I upheld it. For years. Without question. Until the day I didn't. It took less than 48 hours after the wedding slap for the first message to arrive. You embarrassed us. Fix it by signing the papers. Let's not make this uglier than it already is. No. Are you okay? No apology. Just that. I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred, thumb hovering over the reply button. I typed 1,000 things I never sent. Then I deleted the message and shut off my phone. But silence didn't protect me. It never had. By Monday, the whispers had begun. My aunt called to say she hoped we could all just move forward. My mother left a voicemail that said she wasn't taking sides, as if there were sides to take when your daughter was slapped across the face in front of 100 wedding guests. Lily sent a text that said, "It's just a house. Why are you always so dramatic?" I almost laughed, a laugh that turned into a sob, then folded in on itself. They had decided, collectively, maybe even unconsciously, that I was the problem. That I was the one complicating things by not surrendering, not giving away the only thing I'd ever built for myself. It wasn't just a house. It was the first time I'd ever said no, and they couldn't stand it. Work suffered. I'd always been efficient, the one who hit every deadline, remembered every birthday, brought extra coffee to meetings. But something in me had cracked, and it showed. One morning, I snapped at a client. My hands trembled while trying to give a presentation I used to recite by heart. My manager gently pulled me aside afterward and asked if everything was all right. I said I was just tired. But tired was too soft a word. What I felt was hollow. That night, I got home late. I remember the way the porch light buzzed above me, casting everything in a dull yellow. The front door was unlocked, which made no sense. I always locked it. I stepped inside. The air was still, but wrong. And then I noticed the living room. My photos had been rearranged. The ones of me and my college friends, the silly ones, the joyful ones, gone from the wall. In their place were older family pictures. My parents at their anniversary party, Lily's graduation, a vacation I hadn't even been invited to. I walked to the kitchen, and that's when I saw the papers, neatly stacked. A pen placed just so, a yellow post-it on top. Let's be reasonable. Sign before Friday. My father had been here. I checked the drawer where I kept the spare key. Empty. That was the moment something in me broke. Not dramatically. Quietly. I slid to the kitchen floor, back pressed against the cabinets, knees drawn to my chest. Dinner sat untouched on the stove, a sad, reheated attempt at pasta. The smell of garlic clung to the air, too strong now, nauseating, and I wept, not polite, movie-worthy tears. I wept, silent at first, then ugly, gasping sobs that seemed to come from some deep cellar of myself I'd boarded up years ago. I cried for the house, for the girl who signed papers with hope in her chest, for every yes I gave when I wanted to say no, for the perfume I no longer wore because it reminded me of my mother, for the cards my sister never sent, for the version of me they'd all designed, silent, reliable, selfless, and the parts of me I'd destroyed trying to fit her. I cried until I was empty. Then I whispered the only words that made sense. No more. I stood. My legs wobbled, but I stood. I gathered the papers and fed them one by one into the kitchen sink. Turned on the faucet. Watched the ink blur and bleed. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel powerless. I felt awake. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk and began to write. Not a resignation letter, not a plea, but a plan. I pulled out the manila folder where I kept copies of the house documents, dug into old emails, cross-referenced texts. Everything suddenly looked different now. Sharper. A puzzle coming into view. The deed had his name on it, but I'd paid every dime. The down payment, the monthly, mortgage, the taxes, every utility bill, every repair. I had receipts, invoices, bank statements. He hadn't contributed a cent. And that email, the one he sent the bank, calling the house her property, just copied me in as an FYI. That could be useful, couldn't it? I didn't know yet. But I was done being afraid to find out. Before bed, I taped a note to the front door. No trespassing. Any entry will be considered unlawful. And then I locked the deadbolt. Double-checked it. Triple-checked it. I curled into bed wearing one of my old college sweatshirts, the one with the fraying sleeves and the soft inside. The one that made me feel like I used to. Before contracts, before expectations, before betrayal had a mailing address. In the quiet of the night, I reached for the journal I hadn't written in for months. The page crinkled as I scribbled. They built a blueprint for May. I'm setting it on fire. Let's see what I can build from ash. Disappearing wasn't dramatic. There was no slammed door, no final scream, no cinematic departure with a suitcase and a tear-streaked face. It was quiet. A click of the front door. Lock. A gas tank filled to the top. A single suitcase. Navy, scuffed, familiar, zipped with care. I left before sunrise. The sky was still bruised with night. The world damp with dew. I didn't even bother making coffee. Just slipped on an old denim jacket and left a note on the counter that simply said, "I'm gone. Do not follow." 2 hours later, I was pulling into a sleepy coastal town that smelled like salt and wood smoke. It was the kind of place where time walked a little slower, where the sea was always visible, if only through slats of cottages and sloping roofs. Jenna opened her door before I even knocked. She didn't ask questions, just opened her arms and folded me into a hug so tight I felt something inside me unclench. "The room's still yours if you want it," she said softly, eyes glinting with something like understanding. I nodded, unable to speak. The guest room had lavender walls. Not pastel, lavender. The real kind. Soft but defiant. A color that asked to be noticed without shouting. It reminded me of a blouse I used to love, years ago, before I learned to dress in safe colors. I dropped my suitcase beside the twin bed and sat down, letting the silence settle. There was a quilt folded neatly at the foot of the bed. Books on. The shelf. All paperbacks. A little ceramic lamp shaped like a seashell. I hadn't felt that safe in years. Days blurred. I took a leave from work. Indefinite. Unpaid. Necessary. I slept long hours at first. My body needed the rest. Then I started walking, just to feel the ground again. I wandered into bookstores and lingered in the corner cafes with chipped mugs and scratchy jazz. I bought a small journal with a fern on the cover and started writing again, slow and awkward at first, like learning to walk after a long illness. The lavender walls became my cocoon. They watched over me as I wept into pillows. As I wrote out, memories I hadn't dared face. As I sat cross-legged on the floor eating cereal straight from the box, too tired to cook but too hungry to feel nothing. There were no pictures on the walls. No reminders of who I had been. Just me. Just now. One morning I found myself in front of the community art gallery. I hadn't meant to go in, but the window display caught me. 3 abstract canvases, wild with color, unapologetically chaotic. I stepped inside and breathed in turpentine and linseed oil and something older, something buried. I signed up to volunteer on Saturdays. The first time I held a paintbrush again, my hands shook. But it came back, like language, like breath. The rhythm of my days changed. I woke early, walked to the gallery, ate fruit with Jenna on the porch while the gulls cried above. I told no one back home where I was. No calls, no texts. I became a ghost. But for once, it was by choice. Sometimes I'd open my phone just to stare at it, waiting for the guilt, the pull. It didn't come, until it did. Jenna knocked on my door one late afternoon, her brows pinched in concern. "This came for you," she said, handing me a slim white envelope. There was no return address, just my name, in my mother's handwriting. Inside, a single photograph. My bedroom, my old bedroom, empty. No bed, no books, no lavender curtains, and a note. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I stared at the photo for a long time, long enough for my pulse to slow, long enough for anger to curl around the edges of my breath. They'd been in my house. Again. They'd emptied it. Again. And they were trying to scare me. Again. But something had shifted in me, subtly, over those quiet weeks. I didn't cry. I sat, down at my desk, opened my journal, and wrote with a firm, steady hand, "They want the house. I'll give them a reckoning instead." Then I underlined it twice. That night, I pulled out an old photo I'd packed in my suitcase. One of me, years ago, standing in front of the cottage the day I got the keys. I looked so whole, so unknowing, my eyes wide with hope, arms wrapped around a bouquet my coworkers had surprised me with. I slid the photo into the frame on Jenna's shelf, not because I wanted to remember who I was, but because I was about to become someone else. Someone who didn't vanish quietly, someone who built homes and defended them, someone who didn't mistake survival for silence, stopped surviving and started studying. After the envelope arrived, the photo of my stripped room, the passive-aggressive note, I didn't fall apart. I got to work. I began with a yellow legal pad, its pages soon filled with scribbled names, dates, and the kind of questions that used to scare me. Questions like, how much legal power does a co-owner have when they've paid nothing? What protections exist for financial coercion within families? How do you prove emotional abuse when there are no bruises? I spent hours online in Jenna's kitchen, nursing lukewarm tea and watching the sky shift from fog to gold to gray again. I joined forums, read case studies, printed guides on property law until my fingers were smudged with ink. Eventually, I found a nonprofit legal center that worked with women experiencing financial manipulation, abuse by a quieter name. I booked a consultation. A woman named Rachel called me 3 days later. Her voice was steady, kind, practical. "I've seen this before," she said after I told her everything. A family member uses proximity, guilt, and tradition to access what doesn't belong to them. It's common, but it's also something we can fight. Those words lit something inside me. Not fire, not yet, but friction, heat, hope. She walked me through the steps. It would take time, she warned. I'd need documentation, patience, and grit. I had all three. The next week, I filed a motion to remove my father's name from the deed. I cited coercion, unauthorized attempts to sell, trespassing, emotional manipulation. I attached screenshots of texts, copies of financial records, photographs, emails. Then I did something that felt even braver. I started rebuilding me. I'd always been careful with my appearance, not flashy, just appropriate. Neat, presentable, neutral. But something about cutting off 6 inches of hair, shedding it like dead weight, felt like reclaiming air. I left the salon lighter, unfamiliar to even myself. The ends curled in ways I hadn't seen since college. Updated my wardrobe. Gave away the beige blouses and stiff pencil skirts that whispered, "Don't look too loud." I bought linen, color, texture. A deep plum dress with pockets I didn't need but loved. A mustard sweater that made Jenna grin. "You look like you again," she said one morning as we sipped coffee on the porch. I looked down at my chipped nail polish, the journal in my lap, the paint on my fingers from a new canvas drying in the guest room. "No," I said softly. "I look like who I was before they buried her." 2 weeks later, the gallery invited me to submit work to a local showcase. I hadn't planned to. I was still using cheap brushes, still painting on canvases. I bought with coupons, but I submitted 3 pieces. Abstract expressions of grief and reclamation. Lavender, navy, crimson. The same palette of my life these last few months. All 3 were accepted. The night of the opening, I stood in a small room lit by warm bulbs and buzzing conversation. A woman stared at my piece, the one I'd titled Inheritance, and asked, "What does it mean?" I smiled. "It's about becoming your own origin story." She blinked, then nodded slowly. "I feel that." I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those 3 words. That same week, I was combing through my cloud storage for a tax document when I found it, buried in a forgotten email thread with my mortgage officer. A message from my father, sent 2 years ago, forwarded to me with no subject line. It read, "The house is technically hers. I'm just listed for legal backup. It's safer that way." He had sent it to the bank. It wasn't notarized, not a contract. But it was a confession. I printed it, highlighted it, added it to the growing stack of evidence I kept in a new blue binder. The color of my dress that night at the wedding. The dress I never wore again. I spent evenings crafting a timeline, not just for court, for myself. I wrote every incident, every manipulation, every red flag I'd once ignored. I matched them with dates, text messages, financial statements. It was painstaking. It was cathartic. At the very front of the binder, I slipped in 2 photographs. One, of me on the day I got the house. And the other, the one they'd mailed me, my room stripped bare. Before and after. Loss and reclamation. In the margins of my journal, I began to draft a speech. Not the kind you give in a courtroom. The kind you give when you're reclaiming your voice. I didn't know when or where I'd say it, but I needed to write it. It began with, "I was taught to be grateful, to be quiet, to be small enough to fit inside someone else's expectations. But I am no longer folding myself into their design. It wasn't for them. It was for me. A blueprint for who I was becoming." Every time I looked at the lavender walls of that guest room, I saw the scaffolding of a new life. I saw the home I was building inside myself, one with no co-signers, no silent contracts, no debt owed in loyalty. I wasn't just fighting for a house anymore. I was fighting for the architecture of my own life, and this time I wouldn't be outmaneuvered. They didn't expect me to show up. I could feel it the second I walked into the banquet hall. The subtle hush, the tilt of heads, the reflexive glance toward the door as I stepped in wearing a deep plum dress, the same one I'd bought during my quiet rebirth. It skimmed my figure softly, unfussy, confident. My hair, now shorter and freer, curled neatly at my jaw. I didn't wear perfume. Just rose oil on my wrists. Soft, grounding, mine. The room smelled like buffet food and nostalgia. Streamers in champagne gold curled from the ceiling. A banner, stretched above the dessert table. "Happy retirement, Judith." My mother's friends were already tipsy, clustered near the mimosa station. My cousins whispered near the windows. My aunt stiffened when she saw me. Lily blinked in surprise, then quickly looked away. And my father. He stood near the podium, stiff-backed in his favorite navy blazer, sipping whiskey with the hand that had once slapped me in public and thought nothing of it. I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. But standing there, I felt something strange. Not nerves, not vengeance, just clarity. I belonged in this room, not because they invited me, but because I no longer needed their permission to exist. I waited until the cake was cut. Then, when the microphone stood idle and the crowd began to murmur, I walked up to the podium. I heard the first rustle of confusion before I even spoke. My father turned. My mother flinched, but I smiled. Not smug, not bitter, just free. "Hi," I began, lifting the glass of water beside me. "I won't take much of your time. I just wanted to say a few words, if that's all right." No one objected, but the silence was tight. I came here today because I've been thinking a lot about what we celebrate and what we forget to name. I let the pause stretch. Then I continued, voice calm, even. "I want to thank my mother for her years of work, not just in the office, but in holding this family together. It's no small thing, and today should be about honoring her." I glanced at her. Her eyes were wide. She didn't nod. She didn't smile. But I also want to say something I never said before, something that's been building, quietly, for a long time. The air shifted. I bought my house 4 years ago. I saved for it, budgeted, painted it myself, paid every tax bill and repair invoice. Some of you came to the housewarming. You remember how proud I was. People shifted uncomfortably. I lifted the blue folder from my bag and placed it on the podium. Then I removed the framed document from inside, the one with my father's emailed confession printed and underlined in yellow. But somewhere along the way, my house became a bargaining chip. It was offered behind my back for other people's dreams. And when I refused to hand it over, when I finally said no, I was slapped. In public. In front of family and friends. Gasps. One sharp exhale. A few muttered protests. I held up a hand, quieting them. "I'm not here to shame. I'm here to name. There's a difference." I turned toward my father. "You raised me to be useful, and for a long time I confused that with being loved. I said yes to everything. I gave up vacations, money, time, peace, and I told myself that meant I belonged." I took a breath, but I was never seen. Not really. He said nothing, just stared at me, face unreadable. Well, here I am now, seen, heard, whole. I held up the framed deed. "This document proves what you already knew. The house was always mine. Legally? Maybe that's still being decided. Emotionally? There's no contest." I returned the glass of water to the podium, steady hands. I'm not asking for applause. I'm not asking for anyone to take sides. I'm just reclaiming what should have never been taken. And then softly, "I'm not the good daughter anymore. I'm the architect of my own life." I walked off the stage. No clapping, just silence. The kind of silence that follows thunder. I didn't wait for cake. I didn't wait for apologies or guilt or some Hallmark movie arc of redemption. I left the same way I came. Head high, breath full, heart steady. Jenna was waiting in the car. She didn't ask questions, just handed me a coffee and played soft jazz on the drive back to the coast. 3 weeks later, the court ruled in my favor. The judge's voice was clinical, precise, but those words, full ownership transferred to sole resident and financial contributor, landed like balm on bruises I didn't even know I still carried. I didn't cry. Signed the paperwork with a gold pen I bought just for the occasion. Then I drove home. My home. I walked from room to room that night in socks, touching the corners, the windowsills, the backs of doors. Each room greeted me like an old friend who never stopped waiting. In the second bedroom, I pulled down the beige curtains and tossed them into a box marked donations. Then I painted the walls lavender, the same shade as the guest room that had held me like a womb while I rebuilt. And, in the final page of my journal, I wrote, I was never their foundation. I was always my own architect.